Max's ears snapped forward the moment Sarah parked their patrol SUV outside the Victorian house on Boulevard Southeast. The Belgian Malinois hadn't even stepped out of the vehicle, but his black nose was already working overtime, nostrils flaring through the partially cracked window, his muscular body tensed against the backseat harness, tail rigid with anticipation. "Easy, boy." Sarah Collins unbuckled her seatbelt, noting the tension rippling through her partner's frame. In 6 years together, she'd learned to read Max's body language like her own heartbeat. This wasn't his usual alert and ready posture. This was something else entirely, something that made her pulse quicken with professional instinct. The house stood like a forgotten monument among Atlanta's Grant Park Historic District. Peeling white paint curled away from weathered siding, and overgrown magnolia trees cast deep shadows across the wraparound porch. Broken shutters hung at odd angles, and the front yard had surrendered to Georgia's aggressive kudzu vines. According to the dispatch notes, the property had been auctioned 3 days ago to a local investment company, and the new owners wanted a routine K9 sweep before renovation began. Sarah clipped Max's tactical leash to his harness and opened the rear door. The dog shot out like a missile, pulling her toward the front steps with unprecedented urgency. His usual disciplined heel training seemed forgotten, replaced by something primal and focused. "Max, what's got you so worked up?" She shortened the leash, but he strained against it, whining low in his throat, a sound she'd heard maybe twice in their entire partnership. The whine carried an edge of frustration, as if he was trying to communicate something beyond his training vocabulary. Marcus Webb, the real estate agent, emerged from his silver Mercedes wearing an expensive charcoal suit that screamed, "I make money from other people's misfortune." His smile looked practiced, the kind that never reached the eyes. Gold cufflinks caught the afternoon sunlight as he adjusted his tie with nervous precision. "Officer Collins, thank you for coming out. Shouldn't take long. Just want to make sure we're not inheriting any problems." He gestured toward the house with manicured fingers that sparkled with rings. "You know how these auctions go. Previous owners sometimes leave behind more than furniture. Drugs, squatters, that sort of thing." Sarah nodded, but her attention remained fixed on Max. The dog's focus had zeroed in on something specific, not the front door, not the porch, not the obvious entry points, but lower. His nose pointed toward the foundation, following an invisible trail only he could detect. Every few seconds, he'd look back at Sarah with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to plead for permission to investigate. They approached the front door, Webb fumbling with an oversized keyring. Max's behavior intensified with each step closer to the house. By the time they reached the entrance, he was practically vibrating with contained energy, his breathing rapid and focused. "Any idea what the previous owners were into?" Sarah asked, watching Max's reactions more intently than listening to Webb's response. Her hand instinctively moved closer to her service weapon, not from immediate danger, but from years of training that taught her to trust her partner's instincts above all else. Standard foreclosure situation. Family fell behind on payments after the husband lost his job at the airport. Bank took possession. Property sat empty for 8 months before auction. Webb's voice carried the casual indifference of someone who'd seen dozens of similar situations. Nothing suspicious in the paperwork, clean title, no liens beyond the mortgage. The interior smelled of dust, neglect, and something else Sarah couldn't immediately identify, something organic and stale that made her wrinkle her nose. Max's nose hit the hardwood floor the instant they stepped inside, following a scent trail with laser precision. He moved through the empty living room, past the outdated kitchen with its avocado green appliances, straight toward a door Sarah assumed led to the basement. The house creaked around them, settling into afternoon silence broken only by Max's increasingly urgent sniffing. Sunlight filtered through dirty windows, casting geometric patterns across the dusty floor. But Max ignored everything except the invisible trail leading him toward that basement door. "Down there's just storage," Webb said quickly, his practiced smile faltering for the first time. "Probably mice or raccoons. These old houses, you know how it is. Animals get in through foundation cracks, make nests. But Max knew the difference between rodents and whatever had captured his attention. He scratched at the basement door, whimpering with increasing urgency. Sarah had seen him detect everything from hidden explosives to buried narcotics, but never with this level of single-minded determination. His entire body language screamed that something significant waited below. "I need to check the basement," she announced, reaching for the door handle. The metal was cold under her palm, and she noticed her own heartbeat had accelerated to match Max's intensity. Webb stepped closer, his practiced smile completely gone now. "Really not necessary, officer." The property inspection covered all structural elements, just an empty basement, typical for houses this age. Nothing but concrete walls and old furnace equipment. Sarah paused, studying Webb's face with the analytical eye she'd developed through years of police work. The man was sweating despite the October chill, and his hands had developed a slight tremor. In 6 years of police work, she'd developed an instinct for when people were trying too hard to control a situation. Webb was definitely trying too hard. Max's whining grew more insistent, more urgent. He looked up at Sarah with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to say, "Trust me on this one." In their years together, his instincts had never steered her wrong. The drug bust in Decatur, where he'd detected narcotics hidden inside false walls. The missing child case, where he'd tracked a scent trail through 3 neighborhoods to find the kidnapper's hideout. The warehouse fire, where he'd located 2 unconscious victims the human searchers had missed. Max didn't just find things, he found the things that mattered most. "Just a quick sweep," Sarah said firmly, turning the basement door handle despite Webb's obvious discomfort. "Standard procedure, won't take more than 5 minutes." The door opened with a prolonged creak to reveal wooden stairs descending into darkness. A musty odor rose from below, mixed with something else that made Max practically drag her toward the steps. His tail was rigid, his entire body focused on whatever waited in that basement like a hunting dog on point. As Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the shadows below, illuminating concrete walls and the outline of an old furnace, Max's behavior told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't going to be a routine property check. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would test every skill she and Max had developed together. Sarah's flashlight beam swept across the basement as Max bounded down the wooden steps, his claws clicking against the aged planks. The musty air grew thicker with each step, carrying scents that made the dog's nostrils flare with renewed intensity. At the bottom, Max immediately veered left toward the far wall, his nose pressed against the concrete as if following an invisible roadmap. "See? Just old junk and cobwebs," Webb called from the top of the stairs, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. But he didn't follow them down, Sarah noticed. His expensive shoes remained firmly planted on the main floor. The basement stretched longer than Sarah had expected, with support beams creating shadowy alcoves throughout the space. An ancient oil furnace dominated one corner, its ductwork snaking across the ceiling like metallic tentacles. But Max ignored all of it, focused entirely on the eastern wall where the concrete seemed newer, cleaner than the rest. Sarah ran her flashlight along the wall Max was investigating. The concrete here had a different texture, smoother, more recently poured. Her fingers traced the surface, finding a slight depression that ran horizontally for about 3 feet before disappearing behind a stack of old paint cans. "Max, back!" She moved the cans aside, revealing what looked like a seam in the concrete. Not a crack from settling, but a deliberate line that formed the outline of a rectangular section roughly 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. Max whined and pawed at the seam, his excitement barely contained. Sarah knelt beside him, running her hands along the edges. The section was definitely separate from the surrounding wall, and when she pressed against it, she felt the slightest give, as if it were designed to move. "What's taking so long down there?" Webb's voice carried a sharp edge now, all pretense of casual cooperation gone. "Just being thorough," Sarah called back, not taking her eyes off the wall. She found a small indentation at shoulder height, barely visible but perfectly positioned for fingers to grip. When she pulled, the entire section swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a tunnel that disappeared into darkness beyond her flashlight's reach. Max shot forward before Sarah could stop him, his tactical leash pulling taut as he entered the tunnel. The passage was roughly carved, about 5 feet high and 4 feet wide, with wooden supports every few yards to prevent collapse. The air flowing from inside carried scents that made Max's tail wag for the first time since they'd arrived. Not the happy wag of play, but the focused movement of a dog who'd found exactly what he was looking for. "Max, heel!" Sarah commanded, but her partner was already 20 feet into the tunnel, his dark form barely visible in the flashlight beam. She had no choice but to follow, crouching slightly to accommodate the low ceiling. The tunnel extended much further than a simple basement connection should. After 50 yards, Sarah began to understand the scope of what they'd discovered. This wasn't amateur work. Someone had invested serious time and money into creating an underground passage that connected to... What? Max stopped abruptly at a junction where the main tunnel branched in 2 directions. He sniffed both passages carefully before choosing the right branch, his body language indicating stronger scent markers down that route. Sarah marked the location on her phone's GPS, though she doubted the signal would reach underground. The right branch led upward at a gentle incline for another 30 yards before ending at another concealed door. This one opened into the basement of a different house entirely, one that smelled of recent occupation. Fresh coffee grounds in a waste basket, the lingering scent of cigarette smoke, and something else that made Max's hackles rise. Sarah's flashlight revealed a basement that had been converted into a makeshift living space. Mattresses lined one wall, thin and stained, with chains bolted to the concrete beside each one. Empty food containers scattered across a folding table suggested multiple people had been held here recently, very recently. "Jesus!" Sarah whispered, her hand moving instinctively to her radio. But before she could call for backup, Max alerted on something else. He'd found a cell phone tucked behind one of the mattresses, its screen cracked but still functional. The last text message made Sarah's blood run cold. "Move them tonight. Package arrives tomorrow." The timestamp showed yesterday at 11:47 p.m. Max continued his investigation, leading Sarah to a corner where the concrete floor showed dark stains that looked suspiciously like dried blood. His behavior indicated multiple human scents, some fresher than others, all carrying the same undertone of fear and desperation he'd been trained to recognize in trafficking situations. Sarah photographed everything with her phone, careful not to disturb potential evidence. The basement contained enough proof to justify a full forensic investigation, but questions multiplied faster than answers. How many properties were connected to this tunnel system? How long had this operation been running? And most critically, where were the victims now? A sound from above made both Sarah and Max freeze. Footsteps crossed the floor of the house they were currently beneath, slow and deliberate. Someone was home, and they weren't trying to be quiet about it. Max's ears pricked forward, his body going rigid with alert tension. Sarah clicked off her flashlight and listened carefully. The footsteps moved toward what sounded like a staircase. Someone was coming down to the basement. Sarah drew her service weapon and activated her radio with her free hand, whispering into the microphone. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need immediate backup at..." She paused, realizing she had no idea what address they were currently under. The tunnel system had disoriented her completely. The footsteps on the stairs grew louder, accompanied by voices, at least 2 people speaking in hushed tones she couldn't make out. Sarah needed to get back to the tunnel before they reached the basement floor, but Max had found something else. He stood frozen beside a wall-mounted calendar, his nose pointed at a date circled in red marker. Today's date. Below the circled date, someone had written in block letters, "Final Transport, Warehouse 7. Sarah grabbed the calendar and Max's leash simultaneously, backing toward the tunnel entrance as quietly as possible. The voices above were getting closer, and she caught fragments of conversation that chilled her. Cops sniffing around the boulevard house. and move everything to the backup location. They knew about the investigation. Somehow someone had tipped them off that police were checking the auctioned property. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities as she and Max retreated into the tunnel. Webb was the obvious suspect, but if he was involved, why allow the K9 sweep at all? Back in the tunnel, Sarah moved quickly toward the original basement, her flashlight creating dancing shadows on the rough walls. Max kept pace beside her, his training overriding his investigative instincts now that they were potentially in danger. As they emerged back into the Boulevard House basement, Sarah could hear Webb's voice upstairs, talking on his phone. His words were muffled, but his tone had shifted from nervous cooperation to something more urgent and commanding. Sarah needed backup, but she also needed to understand the full scope of what they discovered before calling in a major operation. If this was as big as it appeared, she'd get one chance to catch everyone involved. Moving too fast might collapse the entire investigation and let the real players escape. Max looked up at her with knowing eyes, as if he understood the complexity of their situation. They'd stumbled onto something that went far beyond a simple property check, and now they were committed to seeing it through. The question was whether they could stay ahead of people who already knew they were coming. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled through her phone contacts, looking for Captain Rodriguez's number. She and Max had made it back to their patrol SUV, parked 2 blocks away from the Boulevard House after their discovery in the tunnel system. The calendar with today's date circled in red burned in her memory. Final transport, Warehouse 7. Before she could dial, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Rodriguez's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah felt a moment of relief. Her captain had an uncanny ability to know when her officers needed support. "Collins, where are you with that property check?" Rodriguez's voice carried its usual authoritative tone, but something underneath made Sarah pause. In 3 years under Rodriguez's command, she'd never heard that particular edge before. "Captain, we've got a major situation here. I need a full tactical team and forensics. We've discovered evidence of human trafficking connected to—" "Whoa! Slow down, Collins!" Rodriguez's interruption felt forced, too quick. "Human trafficking? That's a big leap from a routine property sweep. You sure you're not letting Max's nose run away with your imagination?" The comment stung. Rodriguez had always been Max's biggest supporter in the department, often praising his exceptional track record to other units. For her to dismiss Max's abilities now felt completely out of character. Sarah's mind flashed back to a case 18 months ago, the warehouse district operation that had nearly cost her life. She and Max had been tracking a drug distribution network when they'd walked into an ambush. 3 armed dealers had surrounded them in a narrow alley between shipping containers, weapons drawn, escape routes blocked. Max had sensed the trap before Sarah realized what was happening. His low growl and defensive posture had given her the split second she needed to take cover before bullets started flying. While she'd called for backup, Max had circled behind the shooters, his training and intelligence turning a potential execution into a successful arrest. That night, bleeding from a graze wound on her shoulder, Sarah had looked into Max's dark eyes and made a silent promise. She would trust his instincts above everything else, including her own doubts and other people's skepticism. Max had saved her life by reading a situation no human could have detected. Now, in the SUV outside the Boulevard House, that same dog was alerting to something Rodriguez wanted to dismiss. "Captain, Max's alerts are solid. I've documented evidence of recent human habitation in connected basements, restraints, and a transportation schedule that indicates movement happening today. We need to move fast." "I hear you, Collins, but I need you to slow this down. These trafficking cases are complex jurisdictional nightmares. I can't authorize a major operation based on preliminary observations. Come back to the station, file your report properly, and we'll discuss next steps." Something cold settled in Sarah's stomach. In 3 years, Rodriguez had never asked her to delay action when victims might be at risk. The captain who'd taught her that every minute mattered in human trafficking cases was now telling her to file paperwork while people were potentially being moved to Warehouse 7. What about the calendar I found? It specifically mentions today's date for final transport. A pause. Too long. When Rodriguez spoke again, her voice carried a careful control that raised every alarm Sarah had developed in her police career. Calendar? What calendar, Collins? You said you found evidence of habitation, but you didn't mention taking any evidence from the scene. That's a procedural violation that could compromise any potential prosecution. Sarah hadn't mentioned photographing the calendar or its specific contents in her initial report. She'd only said she found a transportation schedule. Rodriguez's knowledge of the calendar's existence was impossible unless... Max whined softly from the back seat, sensing Sarah's growing tension. She reached back to scratch behind his ears, drawing comfort from his steady presence, while her world shifted around dangerous possibilities. Captain, I need to ask you directly. Have you been in contact with Marcus Webb or anyone connected to the Boulevard property auction? Another pause. This one stretched so long, Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Collins, you're out of line. File your report and return to the station immediately. That's an order. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone screen, pieces of a puzzle falling into place with sickening clarity. Rodriguez's unusual behavior, her knowledge of details Sarah hadn't shared, her insistence on delaying action when time was critical, and now her defensive anger when questioned directly. Max had been right to trust no one but Sarah. His instincts had led them to a discovery that went beyond simple trafficking. They'd uncovered a network that included corruption within their own department. Sarah's hands shook as she realized the full implications. If Rodriguez was compromised, who else might be involved? How deep did this corruption go? And most critically, how could she continue the investigation when her own captain might be working against her? She looked back at Max, whose intelligent eyes seemed to understand the gravity of their situation. They were alone now, with no institutional support and evidence of crimes that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. Her radio crackled with an incoming message from dispatch. Unit 47. Captain Rodriguez requests your immediate return to headquarters for debriefing on the Boulevard property investigation. Sarah turned off the radio without responding. Rodriguez wasn't just compromised. She was actively trying to shut down the investigation before it could expose the full scope of the operation. The calendar's message haunted her. Final transport, Warehouse 7, today, potentially within hours. If Sarah waited for proper procedures and jurisdictional approvals, whatever evidence existed would disappear, along with any victims still in the system. Max's training had taught him to detect threats, follow trails, and protect his partner above all else. Sarah's training had taught her to follow proper procedures, respect the chain of command, and work within the system. But what happened when the system itself was compromised? Sarah started the engine and pulled away from the curb, driving not toward headquarters but toward the warehouse district on Atlanta's south side. She had a partner she could trust completely, evidence that demanded immediate action, and a window of opportunity that was closing fast. Rodriguez might have rank and institutional power, but she didn't have Max's nose or Sarah's determination to see justice done. If the department wouldn't support this investigation, Sarah would have to find another way. Time was running out, and the final transport was scheduled for today. Whatever happened next, Sarah and Max would face it together, just as they had in that alley 18 months ago when bullets flew and trust became the only thing that mattered. The warehouse district stretched ahead of them, and somewhere in that maze of concrete and steel, Warehouse 7 was waiting. The warehouse district sprawled across Atlanta's industrial south side like a concrete graveyard, rows of identical buildings stretching toward the railroad tracks that divided the city. Sarah drove slowly through the maze of loading docks and freight yards, counting building numbers, while Max's head remained raised in the back seat, his nose working constantly through the partially open window. Warehouse 7 sat at the end of a dead-end street, separated from its neighbors by empty lots overgrown with kudzu and scattered debris. Unlike the other buildings in the complex, this one showed recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the gravel parking area, and lights visible through high windows, despite the late afternoon hour. Sarah parked behind a rusted shipping container 3 blocks away, close enough to observe, but far enough to avoid detection. Her radio had been buzzing constantly with calls from dispatch, all requesting her immediate return to headquarters. She turned down the volume but left it on, monitoring for any signs that Rodriguez was sending other units to interfere with her investigation. "What do you think, partner?" Sarah asked, scratching Max behind the ears as they watched the warehouse. "How do we handle this without backup?" Max's ears perked forward, his attention focused on something Sarah couldn't detect. Then she heard it too, the low rumble of heavy vehicles approaching. 2 white panel vans turned into the warehouse complex, their windows tinted dark enough to hide passengers. Sarah grabbed her binoculars from the glove compartment and watched as the vans pulled up to Warehouse 7's loading dock. 4 men emerged from the vehicles, their movements coordinated and efficient in a way that suggested extensive planning. One of them she recognized immediately. Marcus Webb, still wearing his expensive suit, but now carrying himself with the confidence of someone on familiar territory. The warehouse's main door opened, and 3 more figures emerged. Sarah's blood ran cold when she recognized the third person, Detective Ray Morrison, from her own precinct. Morrison had worked trafficking cases for years, building a reputation as one of Atlanta PD's most dedicated investigators. Seeing him coordinate with Webb confirmed that the corruption went deeper than just Rodriguez. Max whined softly, his body tense with anticipation. He could sense the importance of what they were witnessing, even if he couldn't understand the human complexities of betrayal and corruption that made this discovery so devastating. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Officer Collins, if you value your career and your safety, discontinue your current activities immediately. Some things are bigger than 1 cop and 1 dog." The message felt like ice water in her veins. They knew exactly where she was and what she was doing, but instead of fear, Sarah felt a surge of anger. These people had exploited human suffering for profit, corrupted the very institution meant to protect victims, and now they thought they could intimidate her into backing down. Through her binoculars, Sarah watched as Webb directed the other men toward the warehouse's rear entrance. Morrison checked his watch and spoke into a radio, his words inaudible from this distance, but his body language suggesting coordination with someone else. Max suddenly alerted, his nose pointing toward a drainage pipe that ran along the eastern side of the warehouse complex. Sarah followed his gaze and spotted what had caught his attention. Fresh footprints in the mud around the pipe opening and what looked like torn fabric caught on the metal grating. "Good eye, boy." Sarah studied the terrain between their position and the drainage system. If Max was right about detecting human scent near those pipes, it might provide access to the warehouse without going through the heavily watched main entrances. But first, she needed to document everything she was seeing. Sarah began taking photos with her phone's camera, capturing license plates, faces, and the coordination between Webb and Morrison. Whatever happened next, she wanted evidence that couldn't be suppressed or explained away. Her radio crackled with Morrison's voice. "Dispatch, this is Detective Morrison. I'm responding to assist with the search for Unit 47. Officer Collins was last seen in the warehouse district and may be experiencing a mental health crisis. All units be advised she should be considered armed and potentially unstable." Sarah's hands clenched around the binoculars. Morrison was using police resources to hunt her down, while simultaneously discrediting her mental state. By the time this was over, any evidence she'd gathered would be dismissed as the delusions of an unstable officer having a breakdown. Max growled low in his throat, responding to Sarah's emotional state, but also to something else. Sarah followed his gaze and saw a figure moving between the warehouses, someone in dark clothing, staying to the shadows, moving with the careful stealth of either a criminal or a cop trying to remain undetected. The figure disappeared behind Warehouse 6, but Max's attention remained fixed on that location. Sarah realized they weren't the only ones watching the operation. Someone else was conducting surveillance, and Max's training told him to be alert to any unknown presence in a tactical situation. Sarah's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Officer Jennifer Chen, one of the few cops in the precinct Sarah trusted completely. Sarah hesitated. Answering would reveal her location to anyone monitoring police communications, but Chen might be trying to warn her about something critical. She answered on the fourth ring, keeping her voice low. "Chen, what's your status?" "Sarah, thank God. Listen carefully. Rodriguez is mobilizing half the precinct to bring you in. She's claiming you've gone rogue and might be having a psychological episode. Whatever you're involved in, you need to get out now." "Jen, I need you to listen to me. I've uncovered evidence of human trafficking involving Webb, Morrison, and Rodriguez herself. I'm watching an active operation right now, but I can't call it in through normal channels because—" "Sarah, stop!" Chen's voice carried urgent warning. "Rodriguez is monitoring all communications. She's got IT running traces on your phone and radio. Whatever you're going to do, you need to do it fast and off the grid." The line went dead. But Sarah understood the message. Chen was warning her that she was completely isolated from departmental support, with active hostility from her own chain of command. Max whined and pawed at the car door, his body language indicating he'd detected something time-sensitive. Sarah looked toward the warehouse and saw increased activity. More vehicles arriving, people moving with the urgency of a schedule that couldn't be delayed. The final transport was happening now, not later tonight, and Max's instincts were telling her that somewhere in that warehouse, victims were waiting for rescue from people who would never come if Sarah didn't act immediately. She checked her service weapon, made sure her phone was recording, and looked into Max's intelligent eyes. "Just you and me, partner, like always." Max's tail wagged once, not with excitement, but with the focused energy of a working dog who understood the stakes. They were about to attempt something that went against every protocol Sarah had been taught. But sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules that had been corrupted by the wrong people. Time was running out, and the warehouse district held secrets that powerful people were willing to kill to protect. Sarah and Max moved through the drainage system beneath the warehouse complex, following the concrete tunnel that Max's nose had led them to discover. The confined space reeked of stagnant water and industrial runoff, but Max's focused behavior indicated they were on the right track. His tactical training kept him silent, despite the urgency radiating through his muscular frame. The tunnel branched beneath Warehouse 7, and Max immediately chose the passage that led toward the building's eastern foundation. Sarah could hear voices above them now, muffled by concrete, but close enough to distinguish individual words. Webb's voice carried clearly. "Transport leaves in 20 minutes. Morrison, make sure your people are in position to block any interference." Sarah's heart hammered as she realized the scope of what they were attempting. No backup, no official support, and facing not just criminals, but corrupt cops who knew her tactics and training. But Max's steady presence beside her provided the confidence she needed. They'd faced impossible odds before. The drainage tunnel ended at a maintenance access that opened into Warehouse 7's basement level. Max alerted immediately upon entering the space, his nose leading them toward a section of the basement where Sarah could hear sounds that made her blood run cold. Muffled crying, the rattle of chains, and quiet voices speaking in what sounded like multiple languages. 8 people were chained to support beams in the basement, 6 women and 2 men, ranging in age from late teens to middle-aged. Their clothes were dirty and torn, their faces showing the hollow exhaustion of people who'd given up hope of rescue. When Sarah appeared with her flashlight, several of them shrank back in terror, clearly expecting more abuse from anyone in authority. "Atlanta Police," Sarah whispered, showing her badge. "I'm here to help. Stay quiet while I get you free." One of the women, probably in her 20s with dark hair and intelligent eyes, looked at Sarah with desperate hope. "Please, she whispered in accented English. "They say they move us tonight to ships. We never see families again." Sarah's hands shook as she used her multi-tool to work on the chain locks. These weren't sophisticated restraints. They were designed for temporary holding, not permanent imprisonment. But the implications were terrifying. This was a transit point, a way station in a pipeline that moved human beings like cargo. Max positioned himself at the bottom of the stairs leading to the main warehouse floor, his ears tracking multiple sets of footsteps above. His training taught him to monitor threats while his partner worked, and his body language told Sarah they had maybe 10 minutes before someone came down to check on the prisoners. "How many people are upstairs?" Sarah asked the woman who'd spoken English. "6, maybe 7. 2 have police clothes like you. They say they own police, that no one will help us." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "We think no one cares about people like us." "I care," Sarah said, freeing the woman's chains, "and I'm going to make sure they pay for what they've done to you." As Sarah worked to free the other victims, Max's alert posture suddenly shifted to high alarm. Footsteps were descending the stairs. Heavy boots, multiple people, moving with tactical precision. Sarah drew her weapon and positioned herself between the victims and the stairway just as Morrison appeared with 2 other men she didn't recognize. Well, Officer Collins and her famous dog. Morrison's voice carried the casual confidence of someone who thought he held all the advantages. "Rodriguez said you'd lost your mind, but I think you're just too honest for your own good. It's over, Morrison. I've documented everything. The tunnels, the corruption, all of it. Even if you stop me here, the evidence will surface." Morrison laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Evidence? You mean the ravings of a mentally unstable cop who broke into private property and interfered with a legitimate law enforcement operation? By the time we're done with your story, no one will believe a word you say." One of Morrison's companions raised a weapon towards Sarah, but Max moved faster than human thought. The dog launched himself up the stairs, his 90 pounds of trained muscle colliding with the gunman before he could fire. The man's scream echoed through the warehouse as Max's jaws clamped down on his wrist, sending the weapon clattering across the concrete floor. Sarah used the distraction to take cover behind a support beam, calling out to the freed victims, "Stay down! Get behind cover!" Morrison drew his service weapon, but he was caught in a tactical nightmare. Sarah was a fellow officer, and killing her would require explanations he couldn't provide. "Collins, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Walk away now, and we can work something out." "The only thing I'm working out is how many years you'll spend in federal prison for human trafficking." Sarah kept her weapon trained on Morrison while tracking the 3rd man who was trying to flank her position. Max released the wounded gunman and moved to intercept the flanking attacker, his growl filling the basement with menace. The dog's tactical training was evident in every movement. He understood the geometry of the fight and positioned himself to protect both Sarah and the victims. "You can't win this, Collins," Morrison called out. "Even if you take us down, Rodriguez has the entire department looking for you. By tomorrow, you'll be in custody or dead, and these people will disappear anyway." "Maybe," Sarah replied, "but tonight they go free." She'd been counting footsteps above them, tracking the movement of people on the warehouse's main floor. From the sound pattern, at least 4 more people remained upstairs, probably including Webb. But Sarah had one advantage Morrison didn't know about. She'd sent Jennifer Chen a detailed text message before entering the drainage tunnel, including GPS coordinates and photos of everything she'd documented. Chen was the only cop Sarah trusted completely, and she'd proven her loyalty by warning Sarah about Rodriguez's manhunt. If Sarah and Max didn't emerge from this warehouse, Chen would know exactly where to send federal investigators. Max's alert bark warned Sarah that more people were coming down the stairs, but these weren't Morrison's people. The footsteps were lighter, more careful, and Max's body language indicated uncertainty rather than threat assessment. "Atlanta PD, drop your weapons!" The voice belonged to Chen, backed up by at least 3 other officers Sarah didn't recognize. Morrison's face went white as he realized his corrupt operation had just been invaded by honest cops. "How did you—" Officer Collins sent documentation to federal authorities an hour ago, Chen announced, her weapon trained on Morrison. FBI is en route, along with units from Georgia Bureau of Investigation. This warehouse is now a federal crime scene. Sarah felt a surge of relief, so intense it made her knees weak. Chen had done more than just receive Sarah's message. She'd acted on it, bringing in outside agencies that couldn't be compromised by local corruption. Max trotted over to Sarah, his tail wagging with the satisfaction of a job well done. He'd detected the threats, protected the victims, and helped his partner survive another impossible situation. As federal agents swarmed the warehouse and began processing the crime scene, Sarah knelt beside Max and scratched behind his ears. "Good boy. We did it." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew this was just the beginning. Webb, Rodriguez, and their network represented a conspiracy that probably extended far beyond Atlanta. The real work of bringing justice would take months or years. For tonight, though, 8 people would go home instead of disappearing forever, and that was enough. 3 months after the warehouse raid, Sarah stood at the podium in Atlanta's federal courthouse, watching as Judge Patricia Williams delivered the final sentences in what the media had dubbed Operation Broken Trust. The courtroom packed with reporters, federal agents, and family members of the rescued victims who had flown in from around the world to witness justice being served. Marcus Webb sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, his expensive suits and manicured confidence replaced by the hollow stare of a man who'd seen his empire crumble in a single night. The real estate empire he'd built as a front for human trafficking had been worth over $12 million, all of it now seized by federal authorities and earmarked for victim compensation. "Marcus Webb," Judge Williams announced, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, "you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole for conspiracy to commit human trafficking, racketeering, and corruption of public officials." Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Jennifer Chen, now wearing the lieutenant's bars she'd earned for her role in exposing the corruption network. Chen had been promoted to head the new anti-trafficking task force, a joint operation between Atlanta PD and federal agencies designed to prevent future conspiracies. "Rodriguez is up next," Chen whispered, nodding toward the second defendant's table where Captain Rodriguez sat in her own orange jumpsuit, her once commanding presence reduced to defeated resignation. The investigation that followed the warehouse raid had revealed the stunning scope of Rodriguez's corruption. For 3 years, she'd been receiving monthly payments of $15,000 to delay investigations, misdirect resources, and provide advance warning of police operations. Her bank account showed deposits totaling over $500,000, all traced back to Webb's legitimate business fronts. "Captain Maria Rodriguez," Judge Williams continued, "you betrayed the oath you swore to protect and serve the citizens of Atlanta. Your corruption directly enabled the exploitation of vulnerable human beings and undermined the integrity of law enforcement. You are sentenced to 18 years in federal prison and forfeiture of all pension benefits." Rodriguez's shoulders shook as the reality of her situation finally broke through her denial. 18 years meant she'd be nearly 70 when released, with no financial resources and a criminal record that would make employment impossible. The woman who'd once commanded respect from hundreds of officers would spend her remaining productive years as a federal prisoner. Detective Morrison had received 15 years in a plea agreement that required his testimony against higher-level conspirators. His cooperation had led to the arrests of 6 other officers across 3 precincts, along with dozens of civilians involved in the trafficking network. But the victory that mattered most to Sarah wasn't happening in the courtroom. It was taking place in the witness gallery, where 8 people sat together in the front row, watching their captors face justice. Maria Santos, the young woman who'd spoken English to Sarah in the warehouse basement, had become the primary victim advocate for the case. Her testimony had been devastating to the defense, describing months of captivity, threats, and the systematic dehumanization that characterized modern trafficking operations. After the sentencing, Maria approached Sarah in the courthouse hallway. "Officer Collins, I wanted to thank you again, not just for rescuing us, but for believing we were worth saving." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. The psychological impact of the case had been enormous. Months of depositions, media attention, and the knowledge that her own department had been infiltrated by people willing to profit from human suffering. But moments like this made it worthwhile. "You were always worth saving," Sarah replied. "I'm just glad Max and I were in the right place at the right time." Speaking of Max, the Belgian Malinois had become something of a celebrity in law enforcement circles. His ability to detect the trafficking operation through scent alone had led to invitations for training seminars across the southeast. More importantly, his success had convinced the Atlanta PD to expand their K9 program with additional dogs trained specifically for anti-trafficking operations. Max himself seemed oblivious to his fame, more interested in the tennis ball Chen was bouncing in the courthouse lobby than in the reporters trying to photograph him. At 8 years old, he remained at the peak of his working abilities, with at least 3 more years of active service ahead of him. "Collins!" a voice called from across the lobby. Sarah turned to see FBI Special Agent Patricia Morrison, no relation to the disgraced detective, approaching with a folder in her hands. Agent Morrison had led the federal investigation and become something of a mentor to Sarah during the complex prosecution process. "We got word from the field office in Miami," Morrison said, handing Sarah the folder. "They broke up a trafficking ring last week using intelligence we developed from the Atlanta case. 17 victims rescued, including 3 who were originally processed through Webb's network." Sarah opened the folder to find photographs and case summaries showing how the Atlanta investigation had created ripple effects across the Southeast. Webb's operation had been part of a larger network spanning 5 states, and his conviction had provided the leverage needed to dismantle organizations that had operated for decades. "How many total rescues?" Sarah asked, scanning the documents. 43 confirmed victims freed as a direct result of your investigation," Morrison replied. "Probably twice that many who were moved to safer operations or released by traffickers who got spooked by the arrests." The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 43 people who would have disappeared into forced labor or sexual exploitation, now free because Max's nose had detected something wrong in a basement that everyone else wanted to ignore. 6 months later, Sarah found herself back in Grant Park, standing outside the Victorian house where the investigation had begun. The property had been renovated and sold to a legitimate buyer, a young family with 2 children who had no idea their home had once been connected to underground tunnels used for human trafficking. The tunnels themselves had been sealed with concrete, the evidence photographed and documented before being permanently blocked. But Sarah could still remember the musty smell, the hidden passages, and the moment when Max's behavior had told her that something terrible was hidden beneath an ordinary-looking house. Max sat beside her in the afternoon sunlight, his black and brown coat gleaming with health and vitality. At the mayor's ceremony last month, he'd been awarded the Atlanta Police Department's Medal of Valor, the first time a K9 officer had received the honor. The medal now hung in Sarah's apartment, next to photographs of the 8 people they'd rescued and letters from victims' families around the world. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Sarah asked, scratching behind Max's ears as they watched the children play in the front yard of the renovated house. "What would have happened if you hadn't been so insistent about that basement? If I'd listened to Webb instead of trusting your nose?" Max looked up at her with dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to understand the weight of hypothetical questions. His tail wagged once, not with excitement, but with the quiet confidence of a dog who knew he'd done his job well. Sarah's radio crackled with a new call, another property check, this one at a warehouse in the industrial district. As they walked back to their patrol SUV, Sarah felt the familiar surge of purpose that came with police work. There would always be more cases, more criminals who thought they could exploit vulnerable people without consequences. But they would have to get past Max's nose first, and after 6 years together, Sarah knew that was an almost impossible task. "Come on, partner," she said, opening the rear door of their SUV. "Let's go see what trouble we can find today." Max jumped into the vehicle with the enthusiasm of a dog who loved his work, and together they drove toward whatever challenge was waiting for them in the city they'd sworn to protect.